Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be working on Unit 5. The topic for Unit 5 is summary queries. I'm going to scroll down here, but basically summary queries are a type of query that gather information from a table and present it in a, let's say, more efficient, concise way so you can extract meaning out of the data set, basically. We'll look at a bunch of different SQL functions that enable this to happen. And that kind of leads us to this concept of grouping and summarizing information. And so these kind of work together in many ways to kind of get us to what a summary query is. We will take a look at this topic list here. And for those of you that are watching this video, we just had a little discussion here about how the midterm exam is coming up. And I'm just putting this here on the screen for a moment. So that in the fall semester of 2025, the midterm exam becomes available on October 10th at 12:01 a.m. or something like that, and then is due by 11 a.m. on Friday, October 17th. On Friday, October 17th at roughly noon, I will be posting your midterm grades. That's why the deadline is set to that. There's no late penalties for exams. It will cover materials, and it looks like I'm covering units 1 through 6, right? So like you will have the lecture materials for 6 by the time you get there. And that's something you do on your own time. So anybody that comes here in person in class, or if you're taking the class on Zoom, it's not something we do during class time, right? You do that on your own time. 8 points on the exam. I also issue 7 points of participation for the midterm. And once again, midterm grades are not permanent. They don't stick on your record. Final grades are permanent, however, right? And those are part of your permanent college transcript. All right, let's jump over to W3 Schools here. And I am going to bring up my Brave browser just to get all the ads off the screen, basically. And we'll go to our first link here, which talks about the min and max functions. And we really haven't talked, I guess, very significantly about functions inside of MySQL because we just been kind of utilizing them, right? And it kind of becomes necessary to be able to perform certain tasks. And I have kind of introduced you to some of the concepts already. But how do you know you're dealing with a function inside of SQL? Well, the simple answer is, and this is true in a lot of coding, that we have some sort of a keyword followed by a set of parentheses. Sometimes we put things inside the parentheses, right? We call those parameters or arguments, depending on your perspective. And sometimes we don't, right? It just depends. More often than not, you're putting something inside those parentheses. And usually what you're doing is you're attaching the function to a column in a table or a number or a collection of values of some sort. The first function that we're going to look at, or the first two really, are min and max, and they're kind of inverses of each other. But can you imagine if you're looking at a database table that's really huge and has a ton of information in it and doesn't have, like 20 entries, but it has like 20,000 entries. And you're looking for either the smallest value or the largest value, or maybe you're looking for the smallest or largest value within a range of dates, So like, for example, what was the biggest sale we made in October? That type of thing. So the min and the max function allow you to look at a collection of data, usually some sort of a column in a table, and then you can find either the smallest or largest value related to it. So here's the general syntax for it. And then down here, they'll have more of an example of the output. Now I want you to notice, like in this first example that they're pointing out, they're using the min function on the price column of this table above. And you notice there's a product ID and a name, a supplier, a category, a unit, and then a price, right? And we're also aliasing the output of it. So in other words, it's going to go into that collection of information, find the smallest number, and then put it on the screen and label it as the smallest price. That's what's happening in this code. I want to try that one. That's a pretty simple one conceptually to kind of wrap your head around. As you can imagine, the max function is very similar, right? And notice how this one, they're labeling it as largest price. How much information will be output when I run this query? Well, it's pretty logical. One piece of information, right? We're asking which one was the biggest, not like the 5 runner-ups. We're looking at just one singular value. This is really a pretty useful set of functions here, the min and the max, for the reason I described. Really large data sets, really hard to find that information. Like if you were to do it manually, I guess you could copy it and put it in a spreadsheet and sort it or something like that. Or you could go to the spreadsheet and run basically the same function, right? So spreadsheets kind of do the same thing. So if you're used to doing that as a function in a spreadsheet, this is not really far off from that. It's kind of the same concept. Right. The next collection of functions we're going to look at are count, sum, and average. Now, I think these are, fairly intuitive to figure out as well. Now, if you think about it, I've already had you use the count function pretty early on. I think it was like week 2 or something. I just kind of threw it in there and explained to you what it was. Here we talk about it, I guess, a little bit more formally, but these are very, very common activities when you're looking at numbers or values. Okay, so what does count do? Well, count basically tells you how many of the entries in our table or how many rows in our table match a certain criteria. So like usually when we're doing this, we'll say like, how many people in the customers table first name column have the first name of John? That's just a count, right? So we're filtering for people with the first name of John, and then we're counting those number of people. Another thing that we can do, which is very common, is like, how many entries do I have in this table? And you can just count like, all the entries in the table. And that's kind of the thing that we did at the beginning. And if you remember, I think we just did count, and then inside the parentheses, we used the wild card, which is the asterisk. This is like count all the rows, basically, in this table. How many rows do you have? 45, or whatever it happens to be. So very useful, right? And once again, I like to correlate these, like when you're working in a spreadsheet, like spreadsheets like kind of automatically perform these 3 functions, ironically, right? Like if you look at a spreadsheet of information and highlight a column, it'll give you a count. And if there's numbers in there, it'll tell you what the average is and the total, if you look at it. And I think that's pretty fascinating that we do the same thing in a database. So why are these 3 grouped together? Because they are that common, right? Like, all right, let's look at all the sales for October. What's the average sale amount? Well, I would look at all of the sales, right? Add them together and then divide by the number that there are. Do you see how that's related, right? Because we're doing a sum, we're doing a count, and then we're doing a little bit of math with it. So these 3 functions are very tightly interwoven. So if you want to get an average numerically, you do the same thing. So let's say like this is like the price column. We could figure that out. And then we can also summarize all the values. What were our total sales for October? Those, and notice the syntax. They have examples here, right? So like if I wanted to count how many things are in a table, I could just count, or how many unique products I have, I could just count my product IDs. Those should be all unique, right? Especially if it's a primary key. And that tells me how many entries I have in my table at the same time. If I want to look at like the average of a price, I just run it over that particular column. Now, of course, and think about this, the count can be applied to anything. So I can count names or addresses or zip codes, right? Like how many customers have zip codes in the table, that kind of thing. But price, that has to be something that I can act on numerically. So I can't take the average of a name but I can take the average of price or a cost or something like that. Same is true if we're doing a sum. So I can't add names together to get a total, but I can certainly add prices together to get a total. So sum and average only work on numbers. Count will work on any type of column. Right. I don't feel like I need to go into the examples on these, and if you guys really need the example, you can do it. We'll work through that as we're coding the exercises today. Right. Let's move on to the next topic. There's also the round function. And of course, that one kind of does the same intuitive aspect. And I think this is kind of interesting. Their example here shows you taking a hard-coded number in this case. So this is, I would say this is an unusual approach, right? Because normally you wouldn't hard-code a number in here. But I have the number 135.375. And I want you to notice that this function has two parameters. The first parameter is the thing I'm going to round, and the second parameter is to how many decimal places. Now, when you're dealing with monetary amounts, right, very common to round to decimal places. But, if I was dealing with like US budget amounts, I would probably round to the nearest dollar or maybe tens of thousands of dollars, right? Those are considerations. But usually this is for decimal places. Now, when you're using the round function, it's probably more useful. And I don't know if they have an example here. Here's an example here, where they're doing a select of different columns. So we're going to pull a certain product name and its price, but we're going to round that price to one decimal place. Right. This one actually might be worthy of taking a look at because this, oh, okay, well, I guess it's not working. Sorry, try it now. Editor is not working. Maybe if I do just a bad link. Okay. But either way, the point is, what part of this are we rounding? It's just the price. And so here you can see we're selecting it as a column, but that's also the item that we're rounding. And what would this do? It would list all the products in the table and their rounded price. And I don't know why we'd round to one decimal place, but it's an example, right? There might be a reason for that. So that's the round function. I think we played with that one real briefly already as well, but we'll get a little bit more practice today. Now, the next topic that I'm bringing up is really where we start getting into what I call the summary query stuff. And this is kind of interesting because this is a statement that's very, very useful in SQL queries. And notice that the definition says the group by statement groups rows that have the same values into summary rows, like find the number of customers in each country. Now, what's the common information there? Well, we're looking for people that are from the same country. So like, I want to see all the orders from France, or I want to see all the orders from Mexico, that type of thing. So we're grouping those together. And then usually, and this is the second part of the second paragraph here, combining it with other, what we call aggregate functions like a count. So for example, I might group all my customers by the country they're in, and then I'm going to count how many that is. So give me all the people from Mexico. How many people is that? Right? And you can see why that would be useful. Or group all the people from Mexico, and what was the biggest order we got from Mexico? I'm using the max function. Or what was our average order amount for the people from Mexico? What was the total of all the orders from France? Right. So we're often seeing those conditions together. So normally when we're seeing a group by statement, where we're selecting a column, we're then typically seeing an order by statement as well, right, to sort it. But there's often a combination of placing one of these functions in the mix to help kind of organize the information. Let's take some looks at some basics here. So here we have a query. Let's see if this one runs. Okay, this one runs. Thank goodness. And it says select the count of customer IDs. So how many customers basically do we have with unique IDs? And the country column from the customers table and group this by country. Let's run it and take a look at the output. And then you'll notice what it does, right? So we're counting 3 from Argentina and 2 from Austria and 9 from Brazil, etc. We're grouping them by country and then we're counting, right? And I know the queries, are structured with the select statement first, but in my head, to make sense of it, that's how I say it to myself. So say like in the customers table, let's group these by country and then count how many we have. This one doesn't have a where clause, but you can also throw a where clause in to filter it even more if you wish. If you looked at the next example, right, where we're adding a little wrinkle to it. So in this case, we're counting, once again, by country, but then we're going to order by, in other words, we're going to, sort, right, by the count. So we can use that function once again as a tool for our sorting. So this is kind of an interesting thought. So it's like, well, I could list the countries alphabetically, but what if I listed them by whichever country has the most customers in it? That might be useful for me as like a business manager, right? So if I run that, we'll see, well, most of our customers come from the US, right? And then Germany, and then France, and then Brazil, and we're ordering it descending, but we're doing a count first. So we're grouping them, we're doing a count, and then we're showing it in an order that's useful for us. And I think this would be a common thing. It's like, okay, where do we sell the most of our stuff? The US, right? And then Germany, and it makes sense when you start to group it like that. The other statement that's useful, and I think I covered all the topics there. I guess I should go back and just make sure. All right, here they do have one additional example. So you can run a group by statement while you're doing a join, right? And this is an example of a left join in this case, which I'm not super worried about, but you can pull information from multiple tables and do counts and group bys as well. That's just an example of that. You can click through and check that one out if you wish. The other clause that we're going to look at here is the having statement, which is also part of summary queries or summarizing information. Right, and I want you to notice its usage, and this is pretty important. It says the having clause was added to SQL because the where keyword cannot be used with aggregate functions. So I can't necessarily use where with a count command, right? So having becomes a different way to add a condition into the mix, right? And now if you're saying to yourself, but I see a where clause in there. It's like, yeah, well, that's the initial filter. Having becomes a secondary filter, basically, or filters, plural, if you will. Once again, they have the customer table here. And let's take a look at an example without a where clause. So with this one, they're taking a look at the count of customers in every country from the customers table. We're grouping it by country, so we're doing the same thing we were doing before. But we only want to see the countries where the count in those groups is greater than 5. So if we only had like one customer in, I don't know, Lithuania or something like that, whatever, right? I want to see the countries where we actually sold some stuff. And 5 is a small number, but I think you see where I'm going with that. Maybe the number is 100. Like I want to just see the countries where we had over 100 customers. Right? And notice the condition. So it's kind of a way to kind of filter it. And then if you look at the output here, notice that all the countries listed have 5 or more customers associated with them. Notice that there's no order by statement here, so we're not sorting it in any order. It's just like whatever order it appears. And to me, it looks like it's ordering it alphabetically by country in this case, right? It must be how it's in the thing. But you could add an order by statement to it as well. Let's make sure we got all those topics as well. Here's another example, and this is where they are putting an order by statement in there. And this is very, very similar, but I do want you to notice now that it is ordered numerically, right? So once again, we go from like the biggest customer accounts to the smallest. We're not sorting by country name anymore. A couple more examples here, and I think this is a good example because this one is actually doing a join of two tables, right? So we're joining the employees table with the orders table, and we're joining on the employee ID on both tables. We're grouping by last name, and then we're looking for ones that have a count on the order ID of more than 10. So in other words, and I don't know if you're like kind of figuring out where this is taking us, but I think the output helps to clarify. And we're going to kind of get about this complicated in our homework, by the way. But we're basically looking for customers that have ordered more than 10 times, right? Notice we're not ordering by like who ordered the most. We're just looking for any customers that ordered more than 10 times. Chances are they'll keep ordering, right? These are good customers if they keep coming back, right? Somebody only orders once and never comes back. Well, either they got what they need and don't need anything else, or they weren't really maybe very happy. Those would be maybe people you could target to maybe become good customers or find out why they're not, right? Here's another example, very similar. Look at the wrinkles that they're placing in here. So this is an example of where the where clause does come back in. So we're still joining the two tables the same way, but we're looking for either people with the last name of Devolio or Fuller, right? Apparently we know they're very good customers. And then we're trying to see like which one of those has ordered more than 25 times. And if you run that code, you'd verify this in the previous query, by the way. You can see that Devolio apparently ordered 123 times and Fuller ordered 96 times. So both of them went through the filter. Now, if Fuller only had 24 orders, it wouldn't necessarily appear, right? Because having is kind of like the where clause. That's also a filter. But remember, the having clause works with the group by together, and this is kind of why it like summarizes information. Now, the utility of this is usually for generating reports. So like, why do people do summary queries? Because they don't want to have to look at all the data to figure it out. They want key pieces of information. So the database people write queries that summarize the information according to certain criteria that usually the managers want questions answered for, right? Or whatever their management criteria might happen to be. All right. The other link that I'm going to look at here, because we're going to play with this, and this is on a different website, mind you, is this concept called MySQL ROLLUP. And this is kind of interesting to use. But what ROLLUP does is it's kind of like this built-in reporting feature. And by the way, if you're an Excel aficionado, like you use spreadsheets a lot, you'll realize that Excel has summarizing tools like this built in also, right? And maybe you've played with them if you've taken like an advanced Excel class. If you've just done like really basic formulas in Excel, chances are you've never touched the tools, but I will assure you that this is very Excel-like in its approach. But the concept is that we're able, especially with numeric information, right? So like the number of orders, the price of the order, the cost of the shipping, or something like that, right? Where we're actually calculating values. The rollup command allows us to basically summarize that mathematical information into subtotals and totals, which once again is very useful for reporting. Now they go through the whole example here of setting up a scenario. I'm not going to go into detail on this. I just want to kind of show you what the net result is ultimately. But they talk about like, okay, they make a table, they put a bunch of stuff in it, and then they're joining the like tables together, and then we're doing a group by statement to look at what we have. And so you might, for example, have information like this. So like they're looking at this product line, which year the stuff was ordered in, and how much money was spent, right? And this primitive looking output view, like if you were working MySQL from a command line, which you totally can do, by the way, that's what your output looks like on a command line. It looks like ASCII art, right? But it still works, right? It's still rows and columns and tables, and it's the same information, interestingly enough, right? But here's what you look at, right? Is, all right, I have the order totals for the year, but then I have like 3 entries for classic cars and 3 entries for ships and 3 entries for trucks and buses. And that, well, now if I want like totals of those 3 together, I don't have that. So what really the rollup command kind of brings into the mix, right, is that concept, where we take the columns that we've generated and can output them, so I can come up with something more concise like that, which is, I just want to know all the classic car sales, all the motorcycle sales, all the plane sales, all the ship sales, right? And I want that just that information. And this tool with Rollup kind of does that, right? And this might be sort of like the pinnacle of subtotaling and reporting. Right? Some people will not write this kind of information into their databases, and they'll just take the raw output and then put it in the spreadsheet and then use the spreadsheet to do it. That's a thing, right? But the reality is databases can do this internally. And so like if every month your manager needs hey, I want to know how much of this we sold and how much of that we sold. I don't really care the details. I just want the totals, right? You could build this as a procedure or internal function on the database, and it just does it, right? And then you just get a report every month, right? So that's an example of with Rollup. And once again, if you really want to kind of plow through this page here and go through the process of how they built it, it's all there for the taking. They do kind of keep it rolling, and they show examples that go a little bit deeper, right? And then they show you how to use it with other tools as well. So you can get some pretty complicated looking output with very specific information. It really depends on your functional needs for doing so. All right, that kind of covers all of the topics. So why don't we do this? Let's take our break right now. This will end the lecture portion of the class, and then we'll come back and do a little bit of coding.